The Colorado forest in summer always held a quiet beauty, not dazzling or ostentatious, but a gentle kind of beauty, lush green and vibrant like a wordless melody. Early sunlight filtered through the ancient pine branches, scattering golden light across the ground still cloaked in morning mist. Mountain birds sang their first songs of the day, and the breeze, carrying the scent of resin and damp earth, brushed past like a silent greeting to anyone willing to pause and listen. Jake Holloway paused. He tilted his head back to watch the white clouds drift between the leaves, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of strong black coffee brewed over the small fire he lit at dawn. This was his favorite moment of the day, not because of the coffee, nor the fresh air, but because of the silence. The silence of the deep woods wasn't like the stillness of a high-rise apartment in Denver. It had a soul. It breathed, it spoke. And in that silence, Jake could feel himself, a piece of wildness still lingering inside a man once buried under Excel sheets and 2 a.m. phone calls. Jake had once belonged to the urban world, a finance specialist at Bridgewater Capital, one of the biggest investment firms in the American West. He used to live on the 25th floor of a glass building, where he could see the whole city, but never saw himself. Each day passed like a battle against pressure, deadlines, and soulless numbers. And then, after 15 years of that life, he collapsed, not from physical exhaustion, but from emptiness. No purpose. No connection. He no longer saw himself in what he did. And so, the forest called. Not with a voice, but with longing, like an old childhood lover. He'd grown up in Montana, where the woods and mountains were his first friends. Where he learned to pitch tents, light fires, and listen to sounds well enough to know whether it was a squirrel, a bear, or a deer approaching. That was a part of his soul, and the forest had waited for his return, silently and without resentment. Once a month, Jake packed up his things, drove 4 hours out of the city, and stepped into a world with no Wi-Fi, no phone signal, no emails, no deadlines. Just him, nature, and a bobcat named Bella, a non-negotiable part of his life ever since he rescued her from a wildfire 3 years ago. Bella was a female bobcat, wild, proud, and nearly untamable. Though Jake had raised her since she was young, she had never really been a pet. She came and went as she pleased. She avoided strangers. She hunted in the woods like her ancestors. But with Jake, she allowed a closeness just deep enough to form something special, a silent bond between two souls the world had once wounded. That morning, Jake planned to hike up to Bear Ridge, a little-known trail leading to a rocky ledge that overlooked a valley often filled with clouds. He packed a few things into his backpack, a water bottle, some cashews, a camera, and a notebook. He hoped to spot a few bald eagles or owls, his photography goal this time. But he never made it to the peak. Just over an hour into the hike, as he was pushing through a thick brush, Jake stopped. A strange sound cut through the wind and birdsong, a faint, broken whimper, as if someone were in pain but too weak to cry out. He stood still, listening intently. There it was again. A weak, trembling moan. Closer now. And it seemed to come from the left. Jake turned, pushing through the dense branches, and came to a fallen tree trunk. Beneath its thick shadow, 2 tiny creatures were curled up, shivering like dry leaves abandoned in the forest. Puppies. Specifically, Pitbulls, a breed often misunderstood as aggressive or dangerous. But here, 2 tiny, skinny pups, ribs clearly showing, fur filthy and short, eyes wide with fear. One of them slowly raised its head to look at him, weakly, as if it somehow knew that if anyone could save them, it was the man standing there. Jake's hand tightened around his coffee cup, his chest heavy. "Oh God," he whispered. "What are you doing out here?" No one knew. No one answered. Only the wind through the trees and those eyes of 2 small souls who shouldn't be here, who shouldn't have been abandoned this way, clung to his heart forever. Jake knelt down slowly, careful not to make any sudden noise that might frighten the 2 puppies. He pulled a soft cloth from his jacket pocket, one he usually used to clean his camera lens, and gently laid it on the ground between himself and the small creatures. It wasn't an unconscious act. It was his way of creating a soft boundary, a gesture that said, "I'm not here to hurt you." The puppies didn't move. They were too weak. Their bellies were sunken, breathing short and labored. One of them, with a tiny white spot on its nose, trembled in waves as if battling cold, even though the forest air that morning was cool and gentle. Jake extended his hand, slow and low, fingers open like a silent greeting. There was a faint response. The spotted pup turned its head slightly, letting out a weak whimper, but didn't flee. Maybe it knew, or maybe it simply didn't have the strength to be afraid anymore. Jake reached into his backpack and opened the water compartment. He unscrewed the bottle and used the cap as a makeshift bowl, pouring in some cold, clear water and setting it near the edge of the damp leaf bed where the pups lay. At first, no reaction. Then, slowly, the smaller one nudged its head forward and licked. Then the other. Both began to drink, greedily but feebly, as if water were the only thing keeping them tethered to life. Jake sighed. "Who are you two? Who could leave you out here like this?" he muttered, a flicker of anger rising in his voice. There were no signs of people nearby. No cans, no leash, no remnants to show anyone had been here. A cold but plausible theory crossed his mind: someone had snuck them into the woods to abandon them. Because they were pit bulls? Because people feared lawsuits hassle? Or simply, they didn't want them anymore? Jake clenched his jaw, furious. But anger wouldn't save these lives. He took the spare jacket from his backpack and laid it down to make a soft bedding. Every motion was gentle, as if afraid they might shatter. The pups didn't resist. They were nearly limp in his hands. Part of him felt relieved, but another part was afraid. Afraid he might already be too late. "It's okay, little ones," he whispered, gathering them in his arms like fading embers. "We're going home." The walk back to camp wasn't far, but today it felt like a trial. Jake had to stop constantly, checking their breathing, dripping water into their mouths, doing whatever he could to keep their fragile bodies hydrated. Each step grew heavier, but inside him, a quiet resolve had rooted deeply. If there was even the faintest chance, he wouldn't let them die. Back at camp, Jake laid the puppies near the fire he'd rekindled. He used a dry cloth to gently wipe dirt from their faces, each touch careful and deliberate. A makeshift heater was lit inside the tent, and he placed the pups in a wooden crate lined with his coat and covered with soft towels for warmth. He crushed dried meat and mixed it with warm water into a paste, something like porridge, and spoon-fed them bit by bit. They ate. Very slowly. But it was the first true sign of life. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat beside the crate until dawn, leaving only to stoke the fire or check the temperature. The firelight danced against the tent walls, casting long shadows of a man watching over two tiny lives. The pups lay curled together, occasionally whimpering in their sleep, perhaps dreaming of someplace safer. Above them, the stars shimmered, scattered from the forest canopy to the distant horizon. Jake looked up at them. He knew, from now on, everything was going to change. As dawn crept across the sky, Jake broke down camp. The two puppies had eaten a little more, their bodies still frail, but their eyes no longer held that dull, lifeless glaze from the night before. It was a fragile signal, but enough to ignite a spark of hope within Jake. He gently wrapped them in the soft blue towel he once used for Bella when she was a kitten, layered it with a thick jacket in his backpack, and nestled them into a crate in the back of his truck. The silver-gray pickup rolled out of the forest, winding along the narrow mountain roads, leaving behind the whispers of wind and murmuring pines. 2 hours later, the truck pulled up in front of a familiar wooden gate, the place Jake had called home for the past 4 years. A small log cabin nestled at the edge of the forest, rustic but warm, with vines crawling across the porch and the sound of a brook not far off. Jake stepped out, opened the gate, and before he even called, a familiar silhouette emerged from the bushes behind the house. Bella. The bobcat moved forward with steps light as snowflakes. Her body graceful, her eyes sharp as blades, and her tufted ears perked in alert. This was Bella, not a pet, but a kindred spirit, a wild companion Jake had the honor to share space with. She never ran to greet him like a dog, never curled into his lap. But she came, when she chose to, and today, she had come. "Hey, girl," Jake whispered, his voice as soft as the breeze. Bella stood a few meters away, her golden eyes following his every move. When he opened the truck and lifted the crate holding the puppies, Bella raised her head and sniffed the air. Jake placed the crate on the stone porch. "New guests," he said quietly. "They won't stay long. Just need a little help." Bella didn't move. But her nostrils flared. Her gaze remained fixed on the bundle of towels. When Jake lifted the lid, revealing the two puppies now dozing peacefully, Bella let out a low hiss, not of threat but caution. Jake sat down beside her. "They won't hurt you. Just a couple of babies left behind in the woods. You know what that's like, don't you?" Bella glanced at him, then back at the crate. After a moment, she turned and vanished into the forest, like a shadow. Jake sighed. He knew Bella didn't like disruption. She lived free, on her terms, and any creature entering her domain had to earn her approval. But he also knew she wasn't cruel. She was a wild thing that had learned to coexist with humans without losing her nature. He respected that, and never tried to tame her. While Bella disappeared, Jake carried the puppies into the small guest cabin beside the main house, a place once built for visitors, now the perfect shelter. He laid down soft bedding, set up a heater, and prepared warm water and milk formula he'd picked up from the local vet. Everything had to be clean, quiet, and free of strong human scent. He recalled all the advice he'd once learned when raising Bella as a cub. Jake stayed with them all day. He gave them temporary names: Scout, the bigger, braver one with the white spot on his nose, and River, the smaller one, more fragile, who whimpered in his sleep. Both could now take a few shaky steps, though still wobbly. As night fell, Jake sat on the porch, checking his phone using a patchy satellite signal, making calls to local shelters. The responses were all too familiar. "Pitbull pups, huh? We're overloaded. That breed's tough, hard to find adopters. We can get them vaccinated, but the next opening is in 2 weeks. Frustration gnawed at Jake, a feeling he'd known when saving Bella, that sometimes, between red tape and cold policies, a life deemed troublesome might simply be discarded, if no one stood up for it. The night was quiet. Crickets sang, and wind rustled through the pine trees. Then, a sound. Jake looked up. Bella was sitting there, on the porch steps. In the dark, only her eyes caught the cabin's faint light. Jake stood up, saying nothing. Bella didn't take her eyes off the cabin, the one where the pups were sleeping. Then she let out a soft sound, a hiss unlike any he'd heard from her before. It wasn't a warning, nor a hunting call. It sounded, almost like a mother calling. Jake froze. "Girl," he whispered. Bella moved toward the door. She didn't scratch or try to enter. She just sat there, waiting. Jake walked over. His hand rested on the doorknob, heart pounding like he was listening to a song without knowing the ending. He wasn't sure if this was wise or foolish. But still, he opened the door, just a crack. Scout sniffed. River whimpered faintly. And Bella stretched her neck forward, inhaled deeply. She didn't enter. But in that moment Jake knew something had begun. The next morning began with a strange kind of light. Not just the sunlight filtering through the forest canopy, but a quiet light, the kind that comes with a change so deep, Jake couldn't quite name it yet. Bella was still there, right outside the cabin door. She didn't howl or scratch. She just sat. Her eyes fixed on the place where the two puppies slept in their makeshift nest of old towels and worn jackets. When Jake stepped out to bring milk for Scout and River, Bella stood and followed, just close enough to catch their scent, but never crossing the threshold. Jake watched her in silence, half wary, half in awe. He opened the cabin door and stepped inside. Bella didn't follow. But when he brought River outside to change the bedding and check a small scratch behind her ear, Bella immediately rose, nostrils flaring deeply. River, cradled in Jake's arms, let out a soft whimper, something closer to a kitten's mew than a puppy's bark. It was the kind of sound born from instinct, soft, fragile, and universal. "I'm here, Mama?" And that was the moment Bella changed. She lifted her head and made a series of sounds Jake had never heard from her before, a soft hiss, a nasal whine, strange little calls, like a mother cat calling to her young. Jake stood frozen, his chest tightening. Not out of fear, but because he was witnessing something sacred unfold between creatures of different species. That afternoon, for the first time, Jake placed the crate holding the puppies right on the porch, under the shade. Bella approached slowly, as if checking whether she was allowed. As she drew close, Scout lifted his head, sniffed, and licked her paw. Jake couldn't believe what he was seeing. Bella didn't recoil. She lowered her head and gently brushed her tongue over the pup's forehead. One lick, wet, rough, but unmistakably communicative. Acceptance. Care. That night, Jake didn't bring the pups into the cabin. He left them on the porch in their warm crate, placed right beside Bella, who had curled up next to them like a guardian warrior. No one taught her. No one told her what to do. But when Scout stirred and whimpered, Bella rose, nudged the blanket aside, and used her head to gently guide him onto her back. That image, so tender, so natural, tightened something in Jake's chest. He raised his camera instinctively, then slowly lowered it again. Some moments, he realized, aren't meant to be captured. They're meant to be remembered, like secrets shared between souls that truly understand each other. In the days that followed, that bond only deepened. Bella stopped hunting at night. She stayed with Scout and River all day. When they first tried to stand and wobble across the yard, drunken and uncertain, she didn't intervene, only watched, like a mother letting her children fall so they could learn to stand. When Jake fed them, she sat a few meters away, observing every movement. Never jealous. Never possessive. Just present, with her gaze, her breath, her being. River, especially, clung to Bella. The smaller pup often burrowed into the thick fur on Bella's belly, curling up to sleep as if it were her mother's den. And at night, when River whimpered in her dreams, she was always answered by soft, rhythmic sounds, like lullabies, from a mother not of the same species, but full of maternal love. Jake began documenting everything. Like a quiet scientist. Like a storyteller who knew he was living inside a story the world deserved to hear. By the second week, as the puppies learned to walk steadily, started nipping at each other and racing across the yard, a new undercurrent emerged, something Jake had half expected but still dreaded. Bella's eyes sometimes flickered with confusion, as if she were realizing, these weren't cats. One night, Jake heard a low growl, not aggressive, but heavy. He rushed to the porch to find River trying to climb onto Bella's back during play. Bella stood still, ears flattened, body tense. Not from pain, but confusion. Jake stepped forward, voice soft. "It's okay. You're doing amazing." Bella glanced at him, then gently licked River's forehead, maybe to reassure her, or herself. The moment of doubt passed. And the bond, born not of blood, but of choice, once again held firm. Jake knew, someday, he'd have to say goodbye to the pups. He knew they were dogs. They'd grow, they'd need space, training, socialization with their own kind. What Jake didn't know was, Bella already understood that too. And from that moment on, in the quiet strength of the wild, she began to love them in the hardest way possible. By preparing to let them go. There are moments in a human life, and in the lives of animals, that no language can fully name. That summer was a string of such moments, flowing quietly through the small patch of earth Jake Holloway called home, where a family that should never have existed slowly came together from pieces that never seemed like they'd fit. 3 weeks after bringing Scout and River home, Jake found himself doing less and less. Each morning, when the first light cut through the porch roof, Bella was already there, lying in the yard, eyes half closed, the 2 puppies curled against her belly like jaguar cubs in the Amazon. When it was hot, she led them to shade. When the wind rose, she scraped together leaves to form a nest. And when they played noisily around her, she watched, never looking away. She wasn't their mother. But she did everything a mother would do. Jake had set up a camera in a corner of the yard, originally just to document behaviors for himself. But after a few weeks, the footage even astonished him. A wild bobcat grooming 2 pit bull puppies. Bella pinning River lightly with her paw when she got too rowdy, like she was teaching her how to behave. And one particular afternoon, Scout let out his first bark. A clumsy, high-pitched yelp. Bella flinched. But instead of walking away, she leaned in, touched her nose to his, as if to say, "I'm still here." Those videos, when Jake shared them on a private forum for animal behavior specialists, immediately caught fire. Messages, calls, and emails poured in from biologists, rescue groups, and soon the press. Jake, Marlene, the director of the conservation center where he once brought Bella, called one day. "Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing?" Jake laughed. "If you think I'm raising a family made of a bobcat and 2 pit bulls who act like siblings, then, yeah, you're exactly right." Soon after, the experts arrived. There were researchers from Colorado State University, a veterinary behaviorist, a documentary filmmaker who had once shot footage of elephants in Botswana. All of them wanted to see firsthand what the scientific community had started to call cross-species maternal bonding. But what they found went far beyond textbooks. In Jake's backyard, a fully grown bobcat, not trained, not caged, living in semi-wild conditions, was raising 2 pit bull puppies as her own. And those pups, instead of developing typical canine behaviors, were mimicking Bella, how she played, how she growled, even how she stalked on tiptoe like a wildcat. "They're imitating her," one researcher murmured, eyes fixed on the monitor. The more they observed, the more they realized this wasn't random instinct. It was a learned connection, a deep emotional and behavioral bond built on complex social signals. Something many believed could only occur within the same species. A week later, an animal welfare nonprofit asked permission to bring a small film crew to capture the story. Jake agreed, on one condition: no pressure, no disruption to Bella. She didn't like bright lights or unfamiliar faces. But when Scout and River continued to play freely by her side, she slowly learned to ignore the cameras. The footage aired on a major nature channel. One particular clip, Bella lying in the yard, River's head resting on her paw, Scout gnawing playfully at her ear, went viral under the title, "A wildcat raised 2 pit bulls, and the world can't believe it." The fame was never Jake's goal. But he didn't care. What he cared about was the transformation unfolding day by day, in Scout, in River, and in Bella. River, once the friliest, had become agile, alert, and incredibly bonded to Bella. She followed her like a shadow, mimicking every crouch, roll, and nuzzle. She didn't bark like Scout. Instead, she let out soft grr sounds, more feline than canine. Scout was growing fast. Strong-willed but teachable. He had a habit of pressing his face into Bella's back during naps, a classic puppy-to-mother gesture. In Jake's daily notes, he wrote, "I don't know if she recognizes the species difference, but she recognizes the need for love. And she's done what many humans still struggle to do, love without asking, 'What are you?'" But deep down, Jake knew this miraculous family couldn't last forever. Scout and River would grow fast. Adult pit bulls can weigh 65 to 75 pounds. Bella, strong as she was, barely weighed 40. On stormy nights, when all three curled up together on the porch, Jake couldn't sleep. He'd lie there, notebook in hand, staring at the stars, asking himself, "How do you say goodbye when you're not ready to?" September came like an unspoken reminder that no matter how beautiful, summer could never stay. The afternoons grew shorter, the sunlight softer, and the lush green of the forest began to fade into shades of gold. Jake began to feel something shifting, not just in the air, but in Bella's eyes, in Scout's steadier stride, and in River's first deep, echoing bark. The puppies were now nearly knee-high to Jake, their bodies solid, energy boundless. They no longer slept in late. They greeted each day with excited barks, wild sprints around the yard, and the kind of clumsy collisions that made Bella hiss to restore order. And Jake realized the inevitable was drawing near. One day, After Bella was accidentally knocked over by Scout during rough play, Jake stood on the porch, leaning on the railing, quietly watching. Bella didn't react harshly. She simply got up, shook herself off, and walked away, quieter than usual. That night, she didn't sleep beside the pups. She returned to the familiar bush where she used to rest alone, curling up like she had in the beginning, before anyone had entered her world. Jake understood. She had begun to separate herself. The next day, Jake called the therapy dog training organization, the one that had once offered to take Scout and River when they were old enough. He put off that call for weeks. But now, he knew the time had come. "They've grown up strong, well socialized," he said, "and raised with the love of a bobcat." There was silence on the other end, then the coordinator spoke gently. "We can arrange a visit this week. They'll be entered into a specialized program for children with autism and individuals with PTSD. If they pass, they'll have truly meaningful lives." Jake looked out into the yard, where River was wrestling a dry branch and Scout was sprawled beneath the tree where Bella used to sit. Meaningful. Yes. But not easy. The farewell came on a cool October morning. A small truck from the organization pulled up the stone driveway. Inside were 2 trainers, a veterinary behaviorist, and 2 padded transport crates, filled with familiar toys and comforting scents, carefully prepared to reduce the pups' anxiety. Jake had spent the past week getting Scout and River ready, accustoming them to the crates, to basic commands, to strangers, to new sounds. They weren't afraid. They trusted him. But Bella was different. She had sensed something, long before anyone said a word. That morning, she paced around the cabin, refusing to settle. When the strangers stepped out of the truck, she didn't growl, but kept her distance, eyes wary, as if to say, "What are you here to take from me?" Jake knelt by the water tub near the porch and called softly. "No one's taking anything, Bella. They're just growing up. It's time for their journey." He knew she didn't understand the words. But she understood the feeling. When Scout and River were gently placed into the crates, Bella let out a long, raw hiss, followed by a string of guttural sounds Jake had never heard before. A cry, sharp, strangled, like a knot stuck in the throat. River heard it. Scout too. They both turned, straining against the crates, reaching for her, and in that moment it looked almost like tears welled up in a bobcat's eyes. Jake bowed his head, his chest twisted with pain. "You did better than anyone ever could," he whispered. "Now it's time to let them fly." As the truck pulled away from the driveway, Bella followed for a short distance. Not out of aggression. Not from instinct. But like a mother running after the school bus on her child's first day away. She didn't cry again. She just ran. Then she stopped, just as the truck disappeared from sight, and sat, unmoving, like a statue carved from silence. Jake walked over and sat down beside her on the cold ground. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just sat, exactly how she had once sat beside Scout and River, every night, for all those months. 3 days passed. Bella didn't eat. She didn't sleep in the cabin. She didn't hunt. She just lay hidden in the brush, unmoving. Jake began to worry. He called the vet. He called Marlene. Everyone agreed, she was experiencing post-separation depression. No one had imagined a bobcat could grieve like a human. But Bella was an exception. On the 4th day, a small package arrived from the training center. Inside were 2 towels, ones that Scout and River had slept on during their first week in their new home. They still held their scent, one Bella knew better than anyone. Jake placed the towels on the porch, right where Bella used to sleep. At first, she didn't come. But then, as the moon rose, Jake saw her silhouette emerge, slow, cautious, and then, she lay down, resting her head on the towel as if placing it on a memory. And for the first time in days, she slept peacefully. Winter passed quietly over the Colorado mountains like a soft symphony. Snow fell in gentle waves, blanketing the forest where Jake and Bella continued their quiet life. Things had returned to a steady rhythm, Jake shoveling snow from the porch in the mornings, reading by the fireplace at night, and Bella, now visibly older, rarely straying far from her den beneath the old pine tree. Every now and then, she would still visit the porch, lying on the now worn towel left behind by the two puppies. No one called. No one said a word. But Jake knew, each time, she was remembering. So was he. Not a day passed without him thinking of Scout and River, the puppies Bella had raised with a love that transcended species. Every night, Jake checked his email. Each week, the training center sent updates, pictures of Scout bonding with an autistic boy, River curled up beside a PTSD veteran, both now helping to heal others, with the same love once given to them by a wild bobcat. One early summer afternoon, exactly 1 year to the day since Jake had found them in the forest, his phone rang. "Jake Holloway? This is the director of the Bobcat Therapy Center in Arizona. We're opening a new public viewing area for our special dog training programs. Scout and River are a featured part of it. We'd love for you to visit, before the official opening. And, if possible, we'd like to invite Bella too." Jake froze. "Bella?" he repeated, hardly believing his ears. "We've read the reports. And followed the story from the beginning. We believe, if anyone deserves to witness this, it's her." 2 weeks later, Jake and Bella were on the road. The old pickup truck had been modified for comfort, lined with thick blankets, special soft food for Bella, and the familiar open crate she used for vet visits. Bella was uneasy at first, but something in the air seemed to calm her. Maybe she sensed this wasn't a goodbye. It was a reunion. Bobcat Center, Arizona. A sunlit sanctuary with low trees and large enclosures designed to mimic natural environments. From a distance, Jake saw the sign, "Scout and River, Therapy Ambassadors," hanging proudly above a spacious enclosure, complete with a pond, shaded pads, and open space. It wasn't a kennel. It was a home. A guide led Jake and Bella to a private observation room, glass-walled, overlooking the play yard where Scout and River were running. Jake nearly cried the moment he saw them. Scout, solid and steady, was lying on his back in the grass while a small girl gently patted his belly. River, quick and alert, ears perked, was darting around an older man, barking softly like laughter. They looked free. Happy. Whole. Then, the coordinator gave a quiet signal. A staff member opened a small door, allowing Bella into the private viewing area, just behind the glass. Scout and River froze. They sniffed the air. Their ears perked. And then, Scout barked. River howled. Both ran toward the glass, noses pressed against it, tails wagging furiously, drawn by something deeper than memory. Bella stepped forward, slowly, with quiet confidence, and stopped just inches from the glass. She raised her head. Met the eyes of her children. River whimpered. Scout nudged his head against the glass. Bella let out a soft hiss, followed by that familiar chattering sound, a call from a mother to her young. A year had passed. A whole life had gone by. But they remembered. And she had never forgotten. The reunion lasted nearly an hour, no need for touch, no need for embraces. Just eyes, breath, presence. Enough to warm the soul. Before they left, the center director approached Jake. "We're launching a new initiative. A pilot program called Mothers Across Species, where exceptional animals like Bella can become surrogate mothers to orphaned young, regardless of species. We'd like you and Bella to be honorary advisors." Jake looked at Bella, now dozing peacefully on her old towel, content as if she finally understood everything she did had meaning. He nodded. "We're ready." On the drive back to Colorado, the sunset bathed the western mountains in crimson. Jake drove slowly, his eyes catching every ray like brushstrokes in the sky. Beside him, Bella lay still in her open crate, older, slower, but more content than ever. A year ago, she had been a wild creature living in silence, never imagined to be a mother. And yet, between instinct and tenderness, wilderness and love, she had done something no one else had ever done. She chose to love, and in doing so, changed an entire world. Jake smiled. He no longer needed to search for peace in distant forests. He had found it, in the eyes of a bobcat, and in the warm breath of a family that was never supposed to exist.